The Porsche died at 4:51 in the afternoon on a stretch of Old Meridian Highway that almost nobody used anymore. Victoria Ashford had taken the old road on purpose. She always did when something was pressing down on her that she couldn't name yet. The interstate was faster, but the interstate was noise. 18-wheelers and construction cones and that particular kind of anxiety that comes from moving fast without actually going anywhere. Old Meridian in November was different. The sycamore trees had gone to gold, and the fields beyond them were the color of pale ash, and the road curved through the valley the way rivers curve, not by decision but by nature, like something that had grown rather than been laid. She was 38 years old and had not let herself cry in 4 years. She knew this the same way she knew about a healed fracture in her left wrist. Not constantly, only when the pressure changed. The meeting was in 94 minutes. The Donnelly Group contract was worth $47 million over 3 years, and Victoria had spent 9 weeks structuring every clause. She had rehearsed her closing argument in the shower that morning until the hot water ran out. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, and she had done everything right. And then the engine stuttered. It was small at first, a hesitation between gears that she almost blamed on the road itself. Then the dashboard came alive in orange and red, a sudden crowded display of warnings, and the Porsche 911 rolled onto the gravel shoulder with a slow, almost dignified finality, as if it had made a decision. Victoria sat with both hands on the wheel. She called her assistant, Gwen. Gwen said the nearest certified service center was 41 miles east, and the 465 was backed up all the way to Broad Ripple, and realistically it would be 2 hours. Move the meeting, Victoria said. The Donnelly representative is already checked in at the Meridian Grand. He flew in from Atlanta. Push it to 7, buy him dinner, use the corporate card. She hung up and stepped out of the car. The air was cold and smelled of turned soil and something faintly metallic, warm engine cooling in November air. The valley spread below the tree line in shades of brown and pewter. There were no other cars. There was, half a mile up the road, what appeared to be a garage. A low building with white-painted cinder-block walls and a hand-lettered sign she couldn't read at this distance. She was calculating options on her phone when she heard gravel shift and looked up. The man was walking toward her from a truck parked 40 yards back, a dark blue Chevy pickup, older, with a tailgate that had been dented and hammered back into something approximate. He was somewhere around 40, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been shaped by outdoor work and quiet decisions over a long period of time. He wore a canvas jacket over a dark Henley, and his hands were already moving toward his jacket pockets before he'd covered half the distance, the unconscious reaching of someone who always knows where his tools are. Beside him, a young woman in her early 20s walked with her hands in her hoodie pocket and a library book tucked under one arm. She had her father's eyes calm, taking things in without rushing to a conclusion. "Car trouble," the man said, not conversationally, diagnostically. The way a doctor says, "Does this hurt?" "It's being handled," Victoria said. He looked at the Porsche, then at her, then back at the Porsche. Something moved across his expression, a careful particular attention. 9111 Carrera S, he said. 2018 or 2019? She stopped despite herself. "How do you know that from here?" "The mirrors," he said. 2020 changed the housing shape. Also the exhaust tips. Someone added the sport package after delivery. "Those aren't factory on this trim." Someone who cared enough to spec it right. He said it without performance. As a plain observation. "I'm Denzel," he said. "This is Maya. We were coming back from the university library. I have tools in the truck. The dealership is probably 2 hours out." It wasn't a question. He'd heard enough of the call to understand the situation. "I'll take a look," he said. "Up to you." Maya had already peeled off to sit on the concrete guardrail with her book open on her knee, as if this were a perfectly ordinary place to read. "Fine," Victoria said. "But don't touch anything you're uncertain about." He didn't acknowledge the qualifier. He walked back to the truck and returned with a canvas bag that had been in continuous use for at least 20 years. The handles darkened with oil, the zipper replaced at some point with a different color. He crouched beside the driver's door. "Pop the hood for me," she did. What happened next was not what she expected. She had watched mechanics work before. The efficient boredom of dealership technicians with their diagnostic tablets. The rehearsed confidence of men who do the same job 30 times a week. Denzel Washington did none of that. He stood at the open engine bay and simply looked, for almost a full minute, still, not touching anything. His face had the expression of someone listening to a conversation they're not yet sure they understand. Then he placed one hand flat on the engine block and closed his eyes. "The oil pressure sensor," Denzel said. Eyes still closed, but that's not the source. There's a failing seal on the secondary coolant line. Someone changed the thermostat housing within the last 8 months and didn't torque the lower fitting correctly. The seal's been weeping heat ever since. Victoria said, "The dealerships serviced it in March. That explains it." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "Hour and 40 minutes, he said. If the fitting hasn't bonded to the housing, if it has, 2.5. He worked without explaining himself. That was the first thing she noticed, watching from a careful distance. He did not narrate the process or ask for her approval between steps. He moved through the work the way people move, through something they have done so many times that it has become a private language. A conversation between themselves and the object, not a performance for whoever might be watching. His tools were old without being vintage. A set of combination wrenches with the chrome worn from the handles. A torque wrench recalibrated so many times the original label was gone. A flashlight with grip tape wrapped around the barrel where the rubber had cracked. Everything arranged in the canvas bag with a precision that said the arrangement had been made thousands of times and mattered every time. Maya finished her chapter and came to stand in Victoria's general vicinity, not beside her exactly, just nearby. "Is that your car?" she asked. "It is. It's a good color." Victoria looked at the Porsche. In the late November light, the silver had taken on a quality that was almost blue, the particular shade of metal that catches cold air and holds it. She had not noticed that before, in 4 years of driving it. "I didn't choose it," she said, and was surprised to hear herself say it. Maya considered this with the gravity of someone who takes casual admissions seriously. "Why do you drive it then?" "It was my father's." Maya nodded as if this were a complete answer and returned to her book. At 6:22, an hour and 31 minutes after Denzel had first opened the hood, the engine turned over. The sound was full and immediate, a deep, clean thrum that Victoria had heard 10,000 times, and which, in this moment, on this shoulder of this highway in the cold and the fading light, sounded different. More present, more like something that had been given back rather than restored. Denzel closed the hood. He wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket. "It'll run clean now," he said. "Better than before, actually. There was scaling in the secondary line I cleared while I had access." Victoria opened her purse. "How much?" He shook his head. "I'm not licensed for roadside work. I'm not insured for it. This is just one person helping another person." He said it the way someone states a coordinate. Not with modesty, not with performance. Just as a description of what had happened. "I don't accept charity," she said. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. The recognition of an argument he'd had a version of before. "It isn't charity. Charity requires sacrifice. The only thing this cost me was time I would have spent driving home anyway." He paused. "Your meeting is in 38 minutes. It hadn't been a question. Maya appeared at his elbow. "Can we go? I want to make dinner before it gets late." "We can go," he said. Victoria watched them walk back to the truck. Maya climbed in on the driver's side and slid across to the passenger seat. Denzel started the engine. It needed a beat to catch, the old Chevy, and pulled north onto Old Meridian Highway. Victoria stood beside the Porsche for a moment. 38 minutes. She got in and drove south. She made the meeting. She arrived at the Meridian Grand 12 minutes before 7. Blazer still on, composure assembled back into something that looked like it had never come apart. Richard Donnelly, early 60s, handshake like a declaration of intent, looked at her with the expression of a man deciding whether to comment on something. He decided not to. She closed the contract in 43 minutes. Afterward, sitting in the parking structure of the hotel, she should have felt the usual thing, the clean, sealed satisfaction of a finished task. She felt instead something she couldn't immediately classify. A residue, like the last note of a piece of music still sounding in a room after the instrument has stopped. She drove home to her house in Carmel. She parked and sat in the Porsche for longer than she intended. The car had belonged to her father. His name had been Edward Ashford, and he had been a materials engineer. The kind of man who read metallurgy journals at the breakfast table and kept machinist's calipers in his kitchen junk drawer, because you never knew when something needed measuring correctly. He had worked for 7 years at Crestline Technologies, a mid-sized advanced materials firm out of Carmel, Indiana. Before leaving under circumstances Victoria had never fully understood. She had been 14 when he left. Not left Crestline, left. He took his car to the office one morning in January and did not come home. The police found no evidence of anything. His accounts were untouched. His phone had gone to voicemail from a tower 3 miles from the office, and then gone silent. He had simply, and she had come to resent that word, simply, vanished. The Porsche had been in the garage. She had driven it for the first time at 21, 6 months after getting her license. Her mother standing in the driveway, watching with a look on her face that was not quite fear and not quite grief, but something that lived in the narrow space between them. Victoria had sold the house 4 years later to cover her MBA and her mother's care costs. She had kept the Porsche. She had never fully understood why. Now she got out and walked around the car slowly, the way you walk around something when you're looking for what you've missed. The engine had a different quality tonight. She had noticed it on the drive home. A responsiveness that she hadn't known was missing until it was back. The way you only notice a sound has stopped when the silence arrives. Someone changed the thermostat housing and didn't torque the lower fitting correctly. She went inside and spent 2 hours reading about Porsche 911 cooling systems. What she found confirmed everything Denzel had said with a precision that could not have come from guessing. She understood, by the end of it, that she had driven this car for 14 years without ever really knowing what was happening inside it. She called Gwen at 9:15. "Gwen," she said, "I need you to find someone for me." She drove the Porsche for 6 days before she did anything further. She took it to work twice. She drove it north of Westfield on a Saturday morning, on the long curves the car was built for, and she felt the difference so clearly that she pulled over at one point and sat with the engine idling, just listening. She had owned this car for 14 years. She had never described it as listening back. She was doing so now, internally, without meaning to. A colleague, Patrick, who drove a vintage E-Type Jaguar, stopped beside her in the parking structure Tuesday morning. "Did you have it serviced?" he said. "March service," she said. "That's not from March." He walked around the front of the Porsche. "It's smoother, more even." Like someone corrected the timing, he frowned. "Who did the work?" "A man I met on Old Meridian." Patrick looked at her. "You let a roadside stranger work on a 911 Carrera S?" "He fixed it in under 2 hours," she said, "without a single diagnostic tool." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "What's his name?" "Denzel," she said. "I'm looking into it." Gwen had found him by then. Not easily, there was no shop listing, no online profile. What she found was a sole proprietor business registration from 5 years earlier. Washington Precision Mechanical, registered to a Denzel R. Washington at an address in Noblesville, Indiana. There was one review on a contractor platform from 2 years ago that read only, "He fixed something 3 other people said was impossible. I'm not saying more because I don't want anyone else to find him before I need him again." That review had been left by a man named Gerald Paxton. When Victoria's investigator called him, Gerald Paxton laughed before saying anything else. He restored a 1963 Ferrari 250 GT that 2 Italian specialists had given up on, Paxton said. 4 days. He charged me $420. $420, Victoria repeated. He argued about whether to charge me at all. His daughter was with him the whole time. She's in college now, engineering. Victoria drove to Noblesville on a Wednesday morning. The address was a residential street, modest houses, mature trees, a neighborhood built for function rather than impression. Denzel Washington's property was unremarkable from the street. A gray house with white trim, a large detached garage at the end of a concrete driveway. The garage door was up. Inside she could see a partially disassembled BMW from the mid-'80s and the partial frame of something older, possibly a Jensen, that she couldn't fully identify. She parked on the street. Maya saw her first. She was sitting on the front step with a different book, thick, the spine cracked from multiple readings. She looked up when Victoria came up the driveway and said, simply, "You came back. Is your father here?" "In the garage." Maya dog-eared her page without apology. "He said someone might come." "He said that?" "He said someone might come about the car." She looked at Victoria steadily. "He only helped one person recently, and you're the only one who'd have a reason." She led Victoria into the garage without further comment. Denzel was under the BMW on a rolling board, visible from the waist down. The garage had the particular cleanliness of a working space. Organized rather than sterile. Every tool in a defined place. The floor swept but not polished. The air carrying the smell of penetrating oil and dry metal. "Ms. Ashford," he said without emerging. "How do you know my name?" "Porsche 911E in that specific custom configuration. Registered in Carmel. Previous owner deceased or presumed." He rolled out from under the car and stood. He wiped his hands on the same gray rag as before. "I had a few days." "I need you to look at the car again," Victoria said. He looked at her directly. "Why?" She had prepared a professional answer. She didn't use it. "Because you saw something in it that I haven't," she said. Denzel was quiet for a moment. Then, "Drive it in." He worked differently this time. More slowly. With the manner of someone not so much repairing a thing as reading it. Victoria had brought coffee, 2 cups from a place 3 blocks west, and she set one on the workbench near him without comment. He didn't acknowledge it for 20 minutes, and then drank half of it without looking up. Maya settled at a folding table in the corner with a legal pad, and what appeared to be a graduate-level mechanics problem set, working through it with the focused patience of someone who has made peace with difficulty. "The frame seams," Denzel said, more to himself than to her. He was crouched near the firewall, here and here. "These welds aren't factory spec. Someone added structural reinforcement. Good work, not repair work. No corresponding damage. These are additions." He moved inside the car. He removed the lower dash panel with practiced efficiency. 3 bolts and a panel clip, no hesitation, and then he stopped. Victoria moved closer. In the space behind the removed panel, where there should have been only the standard nest of wiring harnesses and HVAC ducting, there was something else. A small assembly mounted flat against the firewall, perhaps 7 inches across, made of what appeared to be brushed aluminum. It was not jammed in or taped. It was properly bracketed, integrated, as though it had been part of the original design. "That's not factory," Victoria said. "No." Denzel reached in and traced the edges without contact. "It was installed by someone who understood this car's architecture at a drawing level. This isn't improvisation. Whoever did this had access to the engineering schematics." Victoria sat on a workstool that Maya had placed behind her at some point without being asked. "It was my father's car," she said. "He was a materials engineer. He worked at Crestline Technologies in Carmel for 7 years. He disappeared in January of 2009. I was 14. They never found him." Denzel didn't respond immediately. He was still studying the assembly. "Did he work on the car himself?" he asked. "I always thought it went to the dealership." "But," she paused. "He used to talk about it when I was young. He called it the Vault. I thought it was just a name." Denzel looked at her. "I need to open this," he said, "but not quickly. If I force the mechanism, I could damage what's inside." "What do you think is inside?" He looked at the assembly for another moment. "Something your father put there for the right person to find," he said. He spent 4 days studying the mechanism before he touched it. Victoria returned each of those days, which she had not planned. She had quarterly filings, a subsidiary restructuring call, a legal team waiting on her decisions. She came back anyway, parking on the street, walking up the driveway past Maya's rotation of outdoor activities, sitting on the stool while Denzel measured and photographed and sketched on graph paper with a sharpened pencil. He talked to her differently now, less formally, as if some social accounting had been quietly completed and set aside. He asked about her father, about the timeline, about what she knew of Edward Ashford's work at Crestline. She told him more than she'd told anyone in years. Crestline worked on thermal composite materials, she said on the second day, sitting with coffee that Maya had made. Surprisingly good. My father's specialty was what he called embedded documentation. Ways of preserving technical information inside physical systems so the information and the object couldn't be separated. He used to say, she paused. He said that a well-made thing should be able to tell its own story. Denzel set down his pencil. "Embedded documentation," he said quietly. "I was a child. I didn't understand what it meant then. I think I do," he said. "And I think I know what's in this car." On the morning of the 5th day, he called her at 7:20. "Come this morning," he said, "and bring coffee." She was there by 8. He opened it without tools. That was what she would remember afterward, not the contents, but the manner of the opening. He had spent 4 days understanding the locking mechanism, and in the end, he opened it with his fingers and a specific lateral pressure. The way a safe opens when you've finally learned its combination. No force, no drama, just knowledge applied. The compartment inside was small, cushioned in dense foam cut to exact dimensions. Inside it was a flat piece of brushed steel, approximately 3 inches by 4, perhaps 2 millimeters thick. Denzel lifted it carefully and held it under the work light. Victoria stood beside him. On one face of the steel, etched by hand with something fine and precise, a jeweler's tool or a specialized engraver, was a grid of notation. Technical specifications, material formulae, reference numbers, tolerance values. The work was meticulous, every line deliberate. On the other face, in the lower right corner, initials, a date, and a small symbol that Victoria recognized from her childhood, a triangle with a line through the apex. Her father's personal mark. The one he used on drawings he was proud of. EA, January 3, 2009. 12 days before he disappeared. Victoria was not aware of sitting down. She was aware, distantly, that she was sitting on the concrete floor of Denzel Washington's garage. And that Denzel had not spoken, and that somewhere outside Maya was reading on the front step with her shoes off despite the cold. She held the steel piece in both hands. The etching caught the work light in fine bright lines. He had been here, not in this garage, but in this moment, in the intention of it. He had made this, hidden this, trusted that the car would outlast whatever was coming. Trusted that someone would eventually understand where to look and how. He said a well-made thing should tell its own story, she thought, and recognized the sentence as his. Denzel crouched down to her level, in front of her, where she could see his face. "Are you all right?" he said. She looked at him. Yes. He put it there, yes, she was not going to cry. She had not cried in 4 years, and she was not going to do it on the floor of a garage in Noblesville in November. He disappeared 12 days later. "I know," Denzel said. He let the silence do what silence is for. She looked at the steel piece. The notation grid, she recognized the format now, not from her own work but from documents she'd seen once in a storage unit, in a box she'd gone through only partially before putting the lid back on. The reference numbering was Crestline's internal system. "This is from his work at Crestline," she said. "I think so too. He hid it in the car because," she stopped. "Because the car would be kept. Because I would keep the car." A long pause. "He knew you would," Denzel said. She hired a technical translator 3 days later, a woman named Iris Calloway, who worked in patent forensics and knew Crestline's internal notation from 2 litigation matters in the early 2010s. Iris called at 10:40 on a Thursday. "This is a material specification and process protocol for something called Project Halcyon," Iris said. "Filed internally in January 2009. It describes a novel bonding method for high-stress thermal composites, the kind used in aerospace-grade structural components. The engineering is..." She paused. "Whoever wrote this understood thermal fatigue at a level most materials scientists spend careers approaching." "What happened to Project Halcyon?" Victoria asked. "In public record it doesn't exist, but the core methodology described in this notation appears in 4 Crestline Technologies patents filed between 2011 and 2014. No attribution to Edward Ashford. No record of him as co-inventor." Victoria sat with her phone for a long time after she hung up. She had not thought carefully about Crestline in years. They had existed in the background of her father's disappearance like old furniture. Permanent, unremarkable, not worth examining. She had always assumed his departure from the firm 2 years before he vanished had been ordinary. She was now thinking it had been something else entirely. She called Denzel. "I need you to look at some documents," she said. "I fix cars," he said. "You do other things," she said. "And you know it." A pause. "Come at 3, he said. "Maya has class until 5. She brought the files. 3 boxes from a storage unit in Fisher's she'd kept for 15 years and never fully opened. She opened them now, at Denzel's folding table in the garage, while the Jensen frame sat in the corner and the December light came in at low angles through the open door. Denzel was not a forensic accountant. He had no background in corporate filings or patent law. But he had, Victoria came to understand over the course of 3 hours, an unusually systematic way of thinking. The habit of a man who solves complex mechanical problems by understanding how every component relates to every other. He read documents the way he listened to engines, looking for what didn't belong. Looking for what should be there and wasn't. "Look at this," he said after an hour, sliding a page toward her. "The dates on these internal status reports. Your father signed off on the Phase 3 completion of Halcyon in December 2008. Then in February 2009, a new project code appears in the resource allocation, code NX7, not Halcyon. Your father's name isn't on a single NX7 document." "NX7, Victoria said slowly. "The 4 patents filed after he disappeared all carry NX7 in their internal reference codes. Which means someone renamed the project after your father was gone." "Or after he was removed," Victoria said. She looked at her father's signature on the Phase 3 report. His handwriting, small and exact, the E and A of his initials forming a shape she had seen on birthday cards and school permission slips, and now understood on a piece of steel hidden inside an engine. He had known something was wrong. He had made a record and hidden it in the one place he trusted. The man who had most directly benefited from Project Halcyon's derivative patents, who had been at Crestline during the relevant years and risen to senior leadership in the decade that followed, was named Douglas Crane. He was currently the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Advanced Materials, a publicly traded firm whose primary technological advantage came from thermal composite bonding methods licensed from Crestline. Meridian Advanced Materials had revenues of $340 million last year. Victoria noted this with a slow, cold recognition. Meridian Advanced Materials was one of 3 acquisition targets her firm's investment committee had been reviewing for the past 6 weeks. She was the lead analyst on the deal. She had a preliminary meeting with Meridian's executive team scheduled in 4 weeks, with Douglas Crane. "This is not a coincidence," she said. "No," Denzel agreed. She thought about the past 18 months, the acquisition inquiry that had arrived through an unusual advisory channel, the due diligence process that had asked, specifically and more than once, about her personal asset holdings. The dealership service in March, booked through a premium concierge platform she subscribed to for the convenience. She called Gwen at 9 that evening. "The March service," she said. "The concierge booking. Who actually scheduled it? Not who authorized it. Who coordinated the pickup?" Gwen was quiet. Then typing then. "The coordination contact listed on the service order is a pause. The name on file is Douglas Crane." Victoria stood in her kitchen and did not move for a full minute. Her father's car had been in Douglas Crane's hands in March. Someone had been inside it. They had not found the compartment, because, as Denzel had demonstrated, you could not find it without understanding it, but they had tried. She went to Iris Calloway first. "What do I need to establish prior inventorship on a disputed patent filed 15 years ago?" "Original technical documentation," Iris said, "in the inventor's own notation, dated before the patent filing. Contemporaneous, signed, and ideally something that can be forensically dated." "I have a steel plate," Victoria said, "hand-etched, dated January 3, 2009. Iris was quiet for a moment. "Steel engraving can be forensically dated. The composition of the substrate can be traced from manufacturing batches. If the plate is genuine, and it is, you have something significant. Depending on what the specifications describe, you may have the basis for a patent invalidity claim, which, given 15 years of commercial licensing revenue, becomes a very significant financial matter." "How significant?" Iris named a number. Victoria wrote it down and looked at it. She called Denzel that night. "I need one more thing from you," she said. "What?" "I need you to testify. About how you found the compartment, what condition it was in, what the plate contained, and how the specifications correspond to the patents. I need someone who can explain this in precise technical terms to a room full of people who will try very hard not to understand." A pause. "I fix cars," he said. "You graduated from Purdue," Victoria said. "Mechanical engineering. You left 3 semesters before your master's because your wife was sick." "I didn't say anything because it wasn't relevant until now." He was quiet. "Will you testify?" she said. "When is the meeting?" she told him. "Maya's semester ends the week before," he said. "I'll need someone to stay with her while I travel. She's 20, Denzel. She can take care of herself. She forgets to eat when she's working," he said simply. "I'll ask Gwen," Victoria said. "Gwen has a spare room and she always cooks too much." A very long pause. Then, "All right." The meeting with Meridian Advanced Materials was 3 weeks later. Victoria had used the time precisely. Iris Calloway had produced a 46-page technical analysis. Victoria's legal team had filed a preliminary challenge to 2 of the 4 patents. The forensic dating report on the steel plate had returned a probability range of 2005 to 2012, fully consistent with January 2009, with the steel composition matching a batch produced by an Indiana mill that had closed in 2011. Douglas Crane arrived with 4 lawyers. That told Victoria everything she needed to know about what he'd been told was coming. He was a trim man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the particular stillness of someone who has been careful for a very long time. He looked at Victoria across the conference table with the measured expression of a man weighing options rather than facts. Denzel sat to Victoria's right. Dark jacket, clean shirt, hands flat on the table. Exactly as calm as he was when listening to an engine. He was going to be fine. Victoria opened the folder. My father, she said, was Edward Ashford. He was the primary architect of the thermal composite bonding process that Meridian has been licensing from Crestline for 15 years under patents that do not carry his name. He documented his original specifications in January 2009 and concealed them inside a vehicle he knew would be preserved. We have the documentation. We have forensic verification. And we have a technical witness who can explain, in precise terms, the correspondence between my father's specifications and every core claim in your licensed patents. She slid 3 pages across the table. I'm not here to litigate, she said. I'm here to correct the record. Edward Ashford's name will be restored as co-inventor on the relevant patents, with appropriate attribution and compensation structured from commercial licensing revenue to date. Or we proceed with the invalidity challenge, which will trigger the licensing review clauses in your agreements with 7 downstream manufacturers. A process that I believe your legal team understands would be considerably more disruptive than what I'm proposing. Crane looked at the pages. He looked at Denzel. He looked at Victoria. He was quiet for a long time. The car, he said finally. His voice was quieter than it had been when he walked in, on Old Meridian Highway. We had a monitoring arrangement with the concierge service, a flag on the vehicle registration. We saw it stop. We sent someone to observe. He looked at Denzel. We didn't know who you were. Just a man who stopped to help. Just a man, Denzel said. Yes. Crane looked at his own hands on the table. For a moment, just a moment, something crossed his face that was not calculation, something older than that. The look of a man seeing a thing he has carried for a long time from a new angle. Edward Ashford came to me in December 2008, Crane said slowly. He told me the project was being reassigned without his knowledge. He wanted documentation. He wanted his name protected. I told him the firm would handle it correctly. He didn't believe me. He left my office and Crane stopped. I told the executive committee he was becoming a liability. The room was very quiet. I didn't know he would disappear, Crane said. I want that understood. I did not arrange that. Whatever happened to him after, that was not something I ordered or intended. Victoria looked at him steadily. That is a statement for investigators, she said, not for this room. One of Crane's lawyers reached toward him. Crane waved him off. He looked back at the pages on the table. He looked at the number in the corner of the 3rd page. The room saw on his face the exact moment a man understands that the ground he has been standing for 15 years has always belonged to someone else. I'll need to speak with my legal team, he said. His voice was flat now, like something that had run out of air. You have until Friday, Victoria said. They settled on Thursday. Edward Ashford's name would be added as co-inventor on all 4 patents. A formal correction would be filed with the USPTO. A financial settlement, structured from Meridian's licensing revenue over the past 15 years, would be placed in trust for a foundation in Edward Ashford's name, directed toward materials engineering education at Indiana high schools. Douglas Crane stepped down as so that same afternoon, citing personal reasons in a statement drafted by his lawyers. Federal investigators, contacted by Victoria's legal team in parallel, opened a formal inquiry into the original patent filings, an inquiry that, within 6 months, resulted in charges against 2 former Crestline executives for fraud and willful misattribution. As for Meridian Advanced Materials, once the patent challenges were fully filed, 3 of their 7 licensing partners invoked review clauses and suspended payments pending resolution. The company's stock dropped 31% in 4 trading sessions. The board asked for Douglas Crane's permanent resignation 2 weeks later. He did not contest it. It turned out that when you build a career on a foundation that was never yours, the building doesn't argue, When the foundation is removed, it simply stops standing. Victoria drove to Noblesville on a Saturday morning in December. The garage door was open. Denzel was working on the Jensen. Further along now, the frame straightened, the body panels coming back into shape. He didn't hear her car. Maya was on the front step, different book, shoes off despite the cold. "He's on the Jensen," she said. "Hood's welded." "How's Gwen's cooking?" Victoria asked. Maya looked up. "Extraordinarily good," she said, with a gravity that was entirely sincere. Victoria sat on the step beside her. "Are you going to try to pay my dad?" Maya asked. "Yes," Victoria said. "He'll say no, I know. He always says no." Maya turned a page. "He says the work is the payment." She looked at Victoria. "Do you understand that?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I think I'm starting to," she said. Denzel rolled out from under the Jensen. He saw Victoria and stood up. He accepted the coffee she'd brought with both hands and drank half of it before saying anything. "It's done," he said. "All of it." She handed him the folder. "Settlement documents. Your name is included as technical consultant. There's a fee attached." He opened the folder. He looked at the number. He closed the folder. "No," he said. "Denzel. I found something in a car," he said. "That's what I do. I don't take money for being the person who happened to show up." Victoria had expected this. She had prepared for this. "The foundation I've established," she said, "will fund engineering scholarships at Indiana high schools. The selection committee has already identified its first candidates." She paused. "Maya's name is on the list. Full support. 4 years. It doesn't come from your fee. It was already in place before this morning." Denzel looked at her. Something moved through his expression that was not the quiet refusal she'd expected. Something more complicated. The look of a man who has spent a long time carrying something and has been offered, for the first time in a while, the possibility of setting part of it down. "You didn't ask me," he said. "No," Victoria agreed. "I didn't. And I didn't ask about Purdue either, or the 3 semesters you were 1 semester from finishing when your wife got sick. So we can be even about the things we didn't ask each other." A very long silence. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, plain and unembellished, which made them exact. That afternoon, Maya sat in the Porsche for 35 minutes. She had asked first, properly, with the formality of someone who has been taught that asking matters. And Victoria had opened the passenger door and she had climbed in and sat with her hands in her lap, studying the dashboard with complete attention. When she came back out, she stood beside the car with one hand on the roof. "The instruments are analog," she said. "Most cars this age went digital." He kept the analog cluster. "He thought you could read an analog instrument the way you read a face," Victoria said. He didn't trust numbers on a screen. He wanted to see the needle move. Maya was quiet for a moment. "That's the same reason I prefer mechanical pencils," she said. "You can feel the resistance." Victoria looked at her. Denzel came out of the garage, wiping his hands, and stood beside them. He looked at the Porsche the way he always looked at engines, not at the surface, but at the intention behind it. "What will you do with it?" he said. "Keep it," Victoria said, "but I want to understand it now. Really understand it. Not just drive it." She looked at him. "Will you teach me?" He looked at her sideways. Not quite a smile. The expression of someone deciding whether to take an invitation seriously. "That's a long project," he said. "I have time," she said. Maya looked at the car, then at her father, then at Victoria, the synthesizing gaze of a person placing things in relation to each other. "Okay," she said, which settled it. Denzel went back to the Jensen. Victoria sat on the work stool she had come to think of as hers, and watched him work. Outside, the December light had gone from pale gold to pewter. The Jensen was beginning to look like itself again. At 5:47, the Jensen's engine fired for the first time. Not cleanly, it caught and roughened the idle hunting, but it fired. Denzel placed one hand flat on the vibrating block and closed his eyes. The same posture Victoria had seen on Old Meridian Highway, in the November cold, beside a car that had been waiting 14 years for someone to understand it. He nodded once. A private confirmation. The engine settled. Outside, the December light continued its slow recession. The valley beyond the garage door going from gray to the deep blue of a moment just before something resolves. The last instant before the final variable in a long equation finally comes clear. And everything you didn't understand becomes the only thing you couldn't have understood any sooner. She drove home on Old Meridian Highway. Sometimes the people the world most easily overlooks are the ones who see most clearly. Not because they've been trained to look, but because no one ever told them to stop. Edward Ashford hid the truth in the one place he trusted, inside a machine he knew his daughter would keep. He didn't leave instructions. He didn't leave a note. He left something better. He left a record that could only be read by someone who already understood that a well-made thing holds its secrets for the person patient enough to earn the right to find them. Denzel Washington was that person. He didn't announce it. He didn't apply for the position. He simply showed up on the side of a highway with old tools and a clean conscience, and he did what he'd always done. He's listened until the machine told him what it needed. And Douglas Crane, who had spent 15 years building a career on borrowed foundations, discovered what happens when you construct something on ground that was never yours to stand on. The ground doesn't argue. It simply gives way. Dignity isn't given, it's recognized, and the people who refuse to see it in others are the ones who eventually find there was nothing solid beneath their feet all along.